Titled Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. Two of the most popular chess players in the world, Eric Hansen, also known as Chessbrah, versus Alireza Firouzja. This is 3 minutes for each side with a 1 second increment. Let's jump right in. Eric Hansen has white, Firouzja has black. He begins with e4. Firouzja responds with c6. Looks like he's going to play the Caro-Kann defense. Knight to f3, d5. And the most common response for white here is knight to c3, the two knights, but Chessbrah, he plays d3. Looks like he wants to play it like a King's Indian attack. Let's check and see. g6. Firouzja sees that these central dark squares are cleared, so it makes sense to put a bishop on g7. And here, Grandmaster Hansen plays bishop to e2. So instead of a King's Indian attack, he's turned it into a sort of a reversed Philidor with the white pieces. Bishop to g7, castles, and e5. And already Firouzja has established a nice, comfortable pawn center, and it looks like he's equalized as early as move 5 with the black pieces. Rook to e1, knight to e7. He leaves his f-pawn unblocked. He also doesn't want to block his bishop along diagonal. Bishop goes to f1, and now white is threatening to take on d5 and put a lot of pressure on e5. Now d4. So Firouzja plays a very committal move, but a good one. He goes ahead and gains space in the center. He releases the tension in the center, and now our structure is very clearly defined. We have basically a King's Indian structure, and traditionally white wants to play f4. Black would like to play c5, c4, and break on the queen side. The problem for Grandmaster Hansen is that the f-pawn is blocked. So he attacks the pawn chain from the front instead with c3, c5 supporting, now b4. Really attacking this chain, really going after it. cb4, cb4. So now we have the same structure but with an open c-file. And this should favor, I think, black because it makes it a little harder for white to gain kingside activity. It's already going to be hard for white. Castles. Knight b to d2. Perhaps the knight can pop into c4, add some pressure to the e5 pawn. And now knight to a6. Now, if this knight went undisturbed, he'd like to play knight c7, b5, c6. But obviously, Grandmaster Hansen is not going to let that happen. So he plays b5, hitting the knight. After knight c7, a4, gaining space on the queen side. Now f6, an interesting move from Firouzja. This definitely strengthens his pawn structure. The e5 pawn is really strong. The problem, of course, it makes it a little harder to get this bishop active, but the bishop was never going to get active on this diagonal anyway. The center is completely blocked. Bishop to a3, putting white's bishop on its most active diagonal and pinning the e7 knight. Bishop to e6, rook c1, and now rook to f7. Firouzja just gets out of the pin of that bishop on the diagonal. Now knight to c4, aiming at this sensitive d6 square. Knight to c8 covers it so that he can't land the knight there. And queen to d2. Perhaps the queen can come in to one of these squares. It also keeps the bishop from developing at h6. a6, Firouzja attacks the queenside pawn structure, trying to create a weakness. In order to deal with that, Eric Hansen just goes ahead and plays b6, gaining space. But that allows Firouzja to play the knight to e8, and now not only is d6 defended for black, but he can play knight to d6 himself and challenge white's very nicely placed knight on c4. a5, solidifying this space on the queen side. Now knight c to d6, knight d6, knight d6. And now this very well-placed knight for white is gone. Rook to c2, and it looks like Grandmaster Hansen wants to double on the c-file, which makes sense. But now knight to b5. Notice the knight is aiming at the bishop, threatening to capture it, but it is also aiming at this very sensitive, weak c3 square, a support point for a knight on the 6th rank for black. Very powerful. And if bishop to b2, then something like bishop to b3 with bishop f8 coming along, it would be strong for black. So instead of that, Chessbrah plays bishop to b4, trying to keep some coverage of this square on c3. So how does Firouzja move that bishop so he can get his knight to land on the c3 square? Well, bishop to f8, challenging the bishop, and there's nowhere for the bishop to go. The trade must take place. The other rook moves over to double, but then after bishop takes, queen takes, boom, knight to c3. And this one knight completely plugs up the c-file and makes these two rooks completely useless. Seeing this, White decides he has no real choice in the matter. He must give up a little bit of material to get activity. So he plays rook takes knight, giving up an exchange, getting a knight and a pawn in return. Pawn takes, and now d4 immediately. He could go ahead and just take on c3. That'd be decent, but d4, that does give this bishop some possibilities. Not that square, but some other possibilities. Also, the knight could become active and also puts pressure on e5. Firouzja plays rook to c8. The best move according to the computers is actually queen to e7, offering the exchange of queens. And White doesn't want to exchange queens because he's down material. And if he takes the pawn, then rook to c8. And now Firouzja is establishing control over the c-file. But instead, rook to c8 was played here. Now d5. This is a pretty good move for White. And he looks like he has sufficient compensation for the exchange in a pawn. He's gaining space, and this d-pawn could become rather dangerous in an endgame. Bishop to g4, rook takes c3, exchange on c3, and now Firouzja plays bishop takes knight. And White can play gf3 here. This is actually decent for White, and this bishop at some point could emerge on h3, and White maintains some control over the c-file. The pawn structure is weakened, but it's not a bad move. In this case, Grandmaster Hansen plays queen takes f3, keeping his pawn structure intact. Only one problem, he does relinquish the c-file, and Firouzja immediately plays queen to c8 to take advantage of the queen's absence. Queen to a3, so the queen could become active in Black's position. King to g7, and now g3. This gives White's king some luft, but it also allows this bishop to activate itself on h3 later, if need be. Queen to c2, immediately hitting the e4 pawn. White plays queen to b4, keeping that pawn defended. And now f5. Not only does Firouzja want to undermine the pawn on d5, he also wants to open up the f-file so the queen and rook can meet at f2 and cause the White king a lot of trouble. ef5, queen f5, threatening to take on f2 right now. So queen to c5 defends the f2 pawn. Queen to e4 was played. Computers show this very strong idea of queen to g4. The idea is he wants to maneuver, the computer does in this case, the queen to the d1 square where it's perfectly placed. It pins the bishop on f1 and controls the pawn's advance from behind. So the idea is the queen to d1 is the ideal square for the queen. Queen to e4, though, is what Firouzja played. And now d6. It turns out the move bishop to h3, with the possibility of playing bishop to e3 and anchoring the bishop deep in Black's position, could hold for White, quite possibly. d6 is played instead, but now queen to d4, the queen goes behind the pawn, as well as threatening the f2 square, so the queens are forced off. And now bishop to h3. So at the moment, it's not yet over. White is controlling the square in front of the pawn, and that could give Black trouble. First, Firouzja plays rook to f6. After d7, and now rook to d6. That's the basic rule. Rook should be placed behind passed pawns. And here he's behind his opponent's pawn, and he's behind his own pawn. So a perfectly placed rook. King to f1 to come over to stop Black's pawn's advance. d3, king to e1, d2 check, king to d1. And now king to f6. Now, it's not so easy. Black can't just give up the exchange here because White does have an extra pawn over here on the king side. So he's got to be a little careful. So f4 is played. Now king to e7, f5, and rook to d5. And in this position, Firouzja won on time, but he is completely winning on the board. Basically, this king will stop this pawn from queening, and then this rook will hoover up these queenside pawns, and Firouzja is completely winning in this final position. Now, even after going over this great game from Alireza Firouzja, there's still some great chess you're missing out on. To fix that problem, believe it or not, the key game you're going to want to watch is in this video right here, so be sure to check that out next. See you soon.